Welcome back to Certified Examiner Training videos. We're covering the maneuvers. We are on lane travel. If you got your score sheet in front of you, you'll find it here on the left side, right about the middle. And you want to know where this one is because you're going to score it probably every time you go out on a drive test. It's just hard to keep these points. I'll explain why here in a minute. So there are some examples of automatic disqualification, a little different from the previous ones we've done. Right? So if an applicant drives over the marked center line of a two-way street by more than one tire width, score this as a violation for driving on the wrong side of the road. Looks kind of like this. More than one tire width over that center line, that's a violation. Now there's no marked lines on here. The applicant drives more than 50% of their vehicle over the center of an unmarked two-way street. Score this as a violation. So they're driving more than 50% of the car over the center of an unmarked road. Now don't score this if it was appropriate for them to do that based on the directions provided or when necessary to legally drive around an obstacle. Sometimes you're going to have on trash day, you're going to wish you'd taken a different route because the trash trucks are out there and the cans are blocking out the corners and so forth. Difficult, and they're going to need to drive around a trash truck occasionally. You're going to have to give them those instructions. Don't score it as a violation because you've told them to do this. If the examiner intervenes verbally or physically to avoid an imminent collision, score this as a dangerous action. Remember, when you have an automatic disqualification, all scoring stops. Take the most direct route back to the school. If another driver has to brake hard or swerve to avoid a collision, remember, brake hard or swerve to avoid a collision being caused by the applicant. Score this as a dangerous action. Remember not to take it out on the applicant if the other driver is just being unnecessarily aggressive. If an automatic lane departure system controls the car, here's the key phrase, preventing a near collision, score it as a dangerous action. First penalty under the lane travel section, we're on the top line, danger potential. These are the 4-point penalties. The vision penalty. An applicant fails to use the best possible vision, usually blind spot check, to determine if a lane change can be made safely. Now remember, movement into another lane or of one car width to the left or the right is necessary before you score this. And don't score it if the lane was protected by a physical barrier. So sometimes you'll get into a turn lane and there's little concrete dividers to kind of guide you into the turn lane. They're not required to do a blind spot check. We do not expect people to drive over the concrete barriers to get into the turn lane. Now you're probably going to score this a lot, especially on the starting maneuver when you tell the applicant, drive to the side of the road and stop. It's pretty rare for people to check their blind spot to the right. And so this gets scored a lot. Signal. If the applicant fails to signal before changing lanes or fails to signal at least 100 feet before changing lanes, and you go, well, how much is 100 feet, right? So you can imagine about 5 car lengths, or if you have broken white lines on your road, about 3 of those. The white lines are federal standard of 10 feet in length and 30 feet space in between them. And so 3 of them is roughly 100 feet. So they do have to signal at least 100 feet before making a lane change or driving to the side of the road to stop, for example. Remember, movement into another lane or one car width to the left or the right is necessary before you can score this. And don't score if the lane they're moving into is protected by a physical barrier. RT stands for right. This means the applicant did not keep to the right when there's no clear center line or center markers are visible on a two-way street. So typically you'll see sometimes applicants will ride right down the middle of an unmarked road like this. That's appropriate to score RT, not keeping to the right. It can be confusing because you see these lanes here, lanes there. Well, they're not really in their lane. Understood. It's not a marked lane, so they still have to keep to the right. That's why this one is different from the others. Now remember, if the applicant drives more than 50% of their vehicle over the center of an unmarked two-way street, score it as a violation, kind of like this. They're driving more than half the car over here. You're like, yeah, that's the end of it. That's the end of this test. You don't say that. you're thinking that in your head. You're like, oh, that's unfortunate. You scored as a violation. All scoring stops. Take the most direct route back to the school. Lane. Now you'll notice there's a lanes 4-point variety and a lanes 2-point. There is a difference between them, as you would have guessed, right? So this one's kind of one to pay attention to, because a lot of us forget it after we do the classroom portion, and then we go back out on the car, like, oh, which one was this one again? Lanes 4 or lanes 2? Right. Lanes 2 is pretty specific. This one covers a few things. Lanes 4-point penalty is where the applicant does not keep the vehicle in a single lane or overlaps lanes where 2 or more lanes in the same direction are clearly marked. So here's one example of that. Drive over those broken white lines, 4-point lanes penalty. Okay, so they hit the lane lines, same direction, clearly marked. Now, this does not include the fog line on the right side of the road. Okay, that's covered under a different section. The one below it, traffic control devices. We're going to get to that in the next video. This one is for the lane dividers. And if you cross over the marked center line on a two-way street like this car does, hits the yellow lines or hits those white lines on the right, both of those are lanes 4-point violation, or 4-point variety. Sorry, I shouldn't say violation, because violation is a very specific error. Now, if more than one tire width is over the marked center line on a two-way street, scored as a violation. So if the car dips over more than one tire width away, that is a violation. Test is over. Scoring stops. Take the most direct route back to the school, and explain to the applicant once they arrive. The curb penalty on lane travel. Anytime an applicant strikes the curb or one wheel over the curb when driving to the side of the road. Remember, when they're driving to the side of the road and they hit the curb, on any maneuver, this is where that's scored. So if you tell the applicant, drive to the side of the road and stop, and they drive to the right and they hit the curb, you score it here. If they hit the curb when leaving the starting maneuver, you score it under starting. So that's the next one here. Anytime the applicant strikes the curb when leaving a maneuver, score it under the section for that maneuver and not here. So lane travel is all the approach into the maneuver. Score everything else under the maneuver itself on the way out. Now the 2-point lanes variety is anytime an applicant occupies both lanes where there's 2 or more lanes in one direction, so the road is very wide, and the lanes are not marked or defined, creating confusion of intentions. That's a lot of fancy words to describe this. Keeping too far to the right when you should be driving closer to the center line. Or even if you're riding right down the middle of this. I've seen this on driving tests before too, where someone is driving on the right and another car passes them on the left because they think that car riding next to the curb is going to turn right soon. And so there's a small congestion issue. It causes some confusion. And it's very specific. That's the only time you score lanes is when they're riding in the middle or too far to the right on a wide, unmarked road. Last penalty under lane travel is weaving. So anytime an applicant changes lanes unnecessarily back and forth from one lane to another, for example, around parked vehicles. So they're riding too far over here and they say, whoop, I'm going to go over to the left and back over to the right, and they're just weaving in and out. It causes some congestion issues. For that reason, it's a 2-point error. This is pretty uncommon. You probably won't score this very often, maybe several times per year. That's it for the lane travel section. Coming up next, traffic control devices. See you then.